Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. This is a little bit of a different type of content for me as I am on my good friend Matthew Gray's podcast, The Financially Fit Couple, where we do a deep dive into exit planning. If you're a business owner, this one's for you. Like and subscribe to the channel and let's get right into it.
Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of the Financially Fit Couple. I'm your host, Matthew Gray, and I'm excited to bring in my good friend Kyle Glenn as our guest on this episode. And what we're going to be talking about today is selling your business. We've had several episodes with guests coming on talking about starting a business, going from being a solopreneur to a business owner with employees. Now we're going to talk about the other end. What do you do when you need to exit? And the reason I wanted to bring Kyle on, he's also a certified financial planner, and he actually specializes in business exits and business sales. So Kyle, I'd love for you to take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into this space.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Matthew. It's a real pleasure. And just to kind of briefly share a little bit about myself, I grew up in the Valley, came here when I was a kid, and I grew up in the household of an entrepreneur. My dad had started several businesses when I was a kid. And so I saw the home life of being a business owner, the stresses, the worries, cash flow, all of those sorts of concerns. And so as I moved into financial planning, as I started getting clients, I felt like I had a natural gravity towards working with business owners because of my upbringing. I loved those conversations. But a recurring question that I had during those financial planning conversations was, what do I do with my business? And so when multiple people ask you that question, there's a theme there that you need to dig in. And so that's what I did. I started researching it, became a certified exit planning advisor. And what I do today is really helping business owners that are looking to sell their business as part of their retirement plan and want to transition on to the next chapter of their lives while protecting what they've built. The business tends to be that central theme in their life, both in their working career as well as part of their retirement plan. And so, really creating a strategy about how do we exit this is something that there's not a lot of education on, especially for Main Street business owners, the type of clients that we take on. And so that's really where we are today. I've really become more into the weeds of that exit planning and engagement for my clients because I think that's what they need.
Yeah, and I feel like it's helpful to start with paying some context as to the why. Why did we get here? You mentioned retirement. Why do you find most business owners want to sell? What are the most common triggers that lead to that discussion? Is it mainly retirement, or are there some other situations where that starts to come up?
Yeah. I mean, best case scenario is that it is retirement, that they want to enjoy the fruit of their labor. Their business has been a paper net worth booster for years, and now they want to have that liquidity event and be able to enjoy life as a regular retiree hopes to do. Um, there are obviously issues that can create a desire to sell that might be more anxiety driven, whether that be the crazy inflation that we've experienced over the last 5 years, creating a compression on their business margins, just making it harder for them to have a profit. Employee turnover is a constant stress for business owners, and at some point, worst case, they just get tired of it and they want to move on. They built it, they know they can do it, but they're tired of it. But there's a lot of niche research specifically for business owners, as they're really just a subset of retirees with unique needs. They don't have the standard planning needs as a W 2 retiree. They have now this huge asset they need to do something with. So, the research I have found is through the Journal of Retirement Planning. A professor at Houston University came out with the idea that the business startup is actually better understood than that of the exit. We know all of the research outlining the risk starting up a business, but there's not a whole lot of research out there for the exit of the business. What we have found, however, is that the exiting of their business is a lower probability of success than what starting up the business is. Many people don't think that way because once you've started up the business, you have this thing called survivorship bias, where that if you have survived this long, of course you can continue on in the future. That's not really the case. Um, so, because they have that bias, many business owners that I deal with, they have this saying, you might hear this as well, is that I never plan to retire. I don't know what I would do if I were to retire. And because of that, they delay participating in retirement planning because of this mental um, thought process of never wanting to retire, not knowing what that next chapter of life looks like. But the exit oftentimes comes about either by choice, which is the best case scenario, or by force. At some point, every business owner is going to exit from their business, whether that be through death, disability, divorce, disagreement, or a partner departing from the business. At some point, something is going to happen within the business where they have to exit. And so, business decisions throughout the course of the operating life cycle of the business can tend to cause issues when they go to that exit planning table, which can kind of precipitate back to your original question as to why they want to sell, because they have made decisions in the past that have made the problem worse for them, whether that be how they've managed cash flow or gathering assets outside of their business. Maybe they're overly concentrated in their business. Those sorts of stress factors can significantly create issues when a business owner turns, let's say, 65, wants to retire, wants to get out of the business, and now maybe their exit path is different, or maybe the triggers for why they want to sell is different. Every single person's unique in their own regard.
I'm fascinated by the piece you mentioned of exiting a business tends to be less successful than even starting a business. And we've all heard the statistics on how difficult it is to start a business. And the thought, Kate, just like it totally rocked me because I'm like, well, I know it's probably not the most successful, but you can always just go, hang a sign on the door that says we're closed and be done, and you've exited. So how do you define successful versus unsuccessful exits, and how do you see those occur in kind of your day-to-day life as an exit planner with these businesses that you work with? What are the big differences between success and non-success?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Just to go briefly into that study a little bit, I believe it was the Exit Planning Institute that came out with the study that said that nearly 80% of businesses listed for sale on the market do not transact, meaning that only 20% do. Pepperdine came up with a reverse study of the startup period. I think it's roughly 35% of businesses only last past that first 5 to 10 year mark. So it's a 15% lower probability of success on the exit than it is surviving the first decade in business. Now, more specifically to your question, the the success of an exit really is in the eye of the beholder, right? It depends on the facts and circumstances and the goals of the business owner. If the business owner is financially set and prepared outside of the sale of their business, where they're not betting their entire retirement on the sale of this one highly illiquid asset, um, then they can, shutter their doors, hang up their shingle, their closed sign, and, you know, move on with their lives. That's totally fine. That's in my mind, if you've done the work for it, that's a successful exit. Now, if you haven't done the work for it, and I might have glanced over this in the Journal of Retirement's research, is that business owners are less likely to participate in retirement planning and specifically holding retirement assets as what their employees even are. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a lower net worth. the opposite is true. They actually tend to have a higher net worth than non-business owners. But it does mean that their net worth is concentrated into their business. And so if they have not done the work necessary to build liquidity outside of their business, a shuttering of the doors is an unsuccessful exit, right? That's when you have to go through the work of exit planning, which I believe is a proactive strategy that should be in part of every single business. Every single business owner should know how they would like to transition their most important asset at any given point. And that it can take a lot of work. It's not just on the business side, but it's also a lot of work on the personal side. You need to know who you are outside of the business. A lot of business owners, myself included, have something called an achievement addiction of wanting to just, go out there and win in the marketplace. And that's well and good. And it can absolutely make you a successful business person. But what do you do when that business is gone? You mentor, you go onto nonprofits. For most people, they can only have so many vacation days a year before they start going crazy. And so knowing how you're going to successfully be that person beyond your business is one of those key determiners of whether or not your exit is going to be successful.
Gotcha. So it's making sense then that, business owners, their balance sheets wrapped up in their business. It's an illiquid asset. Their net worth is usually pretty higher than most, ordinary Americans. But it's figuring out how to leverage that asset to be able to help you to do the other things that you may want or need to do. And I come back to that 20%. I had no idea that rate was so low on successful sales. What are the obstacles that are out there that are causing it to be so difficult for these business owners to sell, what their livelihood is spent building?
Yeah, I mean, that's really a three-headed monster when it comes to the obstacles. There's the and they relate to the personal side more so. But they also have a significant issue within the business. So the first factor that I find that limits, successfully selling a business is the value of the business, the value gap. So think about it this way. Most people can probably understand this is that when you sell your home, you're not just selling four walls and a driveway, right? You're selling memories. You have markings on the wall with, your kids growing up. You have, all of those different memories around the kitchen table and all of that tends to inflate the sale price when you list it, right? Like notoriously, sellers of homes overvalue their business. Or I'm sorry, sellers of homes overvalue their home. The same is true with the business. This is their baby. This is something that they have spent in most cases decades building. When that value does not equal what their perceived value is, that creates a significant obstacle to overcome. And so that requires, specifically within the business, how do we increase the value of the business? Now, some obstacles within the business itself would be, and most commonly, are good record keeping. Uh, Bad financials will kill due diligence faster than anything else. If you don't have clean books within your business, a buyer's going to look at that and they're not even going to go any further because if you don't have clean books, there's going to be other issues that they're going to find, and it's typically not worth their time. Um, and so that's one natural way to help increase the value of your business is to have good record keeping, good standard operating procedures, good documentation of all things related to your business can help to increase the value. But keep in mind that the value of the business is only worth what it's worth if it can operate without you. So if you have a key person dependency there, the business may not be worth anything. And a lot of people may just have a high paying job that they own. Now, that's not a bad thing. You just have to prepare differently. And we'll probably get to that later. But the second factor that can tend to be an obstacle is that wealth gap. what I was talking about earlier, business owners are less likely than their employees to hold retirement assets like a 401k or simple IRA, whatever it may be. So they need to have assets outside of their business elsewhere if they're not going to be participating in their 401k. For many business owners, that's in real estate. You know, it's really hard to find a business owner that also doesn't like real estate. Um, Again, a relatively highly illiquid asset. Um, so the wealth gap specifically, the obstacle that we're looking at there is that if you need the business to transact at a certain number to close where you are today to where you need to be, but the value does not reach that wealth gap, that's where a lot of that exit planning work goes into. And then finally, I think the third and probably most common obstacle is the personal planning. A lot of deals fall apart at the negotiation table because the business owner thinks they're ready to sell, and then they go through all of this due diligence, and then they freak themselves out. To be fair, I mean, it's a big transaction, so I understand it. And then they put a pause on it because they're not quite yet ready from a personal standpoint to move forward beyond the business, which is totally understandable. That's why, as an exit planner, a lot of these conversations have to be in place years in advance so that there is time to prepare properly for it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because it sounds like there's almost two themes there. The one you would anticipate is the logistical, the financial of we've got to have clean books. We've got to have, way for people, potential buyers to verify the data on this business, how it works, what's under the hood, etc. But then there's this big psychological piece to it of what's your perceived value of the business versus what somebody's willing to pay for it, or are you actually ready to take this step to the next season of life? How do you help people address those psychological speed bumps or obstacles that can be some of the biggest reasons for not moving forward?
Yeah, that is probably where most of the work comes in. Um, Financially, the quantitative data around the business, it's not super hard to get that in place. It's the psychological, what you're saying is the most important because a successful exit is one where you are happy and excited about moving into that next chapter of life. If you don't own a business, you might understand this in terms of just regular retirement. It's a very similar conversation. If you spent 40 years working with your employer and now your retirement date is coming up, now you're kind of maybe a little bit scared about what's the next chapter looking like. A very similar situation. All retirees are the same, just with unique needs. Um, what we do is, one, we have the business owner, answer a list of questions to help flush out that conversation, but then also incorporating their spouse into that conversation. Oftentimes, that's a very important and grounding way of bringing that business owner along to seeing what life would look like with their spouse beyond the business. And then, another fun one is vision boarding. Like, what do you like? Literally take things out of a magazine, put them on a board. What if you were to see what your next chapter of life would look like? What would that be? That way, there can be both the visual, the audio, the tactile learning to create buy-in, right? That's what you want with a good financial plan is that the client is bought into the process. That's when you have the most success with that client. And that's what we do to help facilitate those conversations. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I imagine we could spend a whole episode just on that piece of the process, helping people kind of get from A to B of, I think I might want to embark on this journey to I'm finally ready to actually start the process of the transaction and see what's out there. A fascinating conversation. Maybe we'll have to have you back on to just dive into that piece of it.
It's a good one.
But let's,
We're-
go ahead.
With that, one other thing is that one of the first questions I ask when a business owner brings up the sale of their business, like they want to sell it, is what is the motivation behind it? If it's an anxiety-driven motivation, I tend to recommend not to sell because an anxiety-driven decision tends to never be a good result. Even if maybe financially, it turns out well, that psychological aspect never works out. And so knowing your motivation can really help with that psychological process of transitioning on.
So on the flip side, what motivations do you see as successful triggers? Is it retirement? Is it retirement and some other things? What has your experience been?
Retirement is tends to be a big successful trigger. That shows to me that they're putting thought into what their financial picture, what their family life is going to look like. Um, and they want to be able to enjoy the fruit of their labor. That aspect, that trigger tends to be a very good one. Others are, I'm working with a business owner right now who is looking to sell his business to private equity, and it just happens to be a hot market for his industry. And he has a lot of hopes and dreams that he wants to move on to. So if a business owner already has in the back of their mind specific things that they want to accomplish that maybe at this point in their career, their business is limiting, that's also a good indication that maybe they're going about it with the right intentions because they now have part of that next, few years mapped out, at least in their mind. They have some intentionality.
Sounds like the common thread there is it might not work as well if you're leaving something for the sake of leaving something versus going to the next thing, whatever that
Yep.
might be.
Yep. Retiring to something is absolutely the case.
Gotcha. So let's say that they do decide, hey, I want to move forward this. I feel like um, the reasons for it are sound and sustainable. I'm ready to take that next step. You mentioned, somebody you're working with is selling to private equity. I would imagine sometimes you sell to just other, you know, business owners in the local area or maybe a larger corporation. How do you go about matching up a buyer with the seller in these types of transactions?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we do is have the seller create a buyer's list, either people within their known network or having an M&A, a mergers and acquisition advisor come in to help create that third party arm's length transaction. Um, Now, the business owner that I'm working with that's going the private equity route is is a bit of an outlier. Most Main Street business owners valuation of, $20 million or less are not being acquired through PE. They're selling it to someone within their network, whether that be a competitor in the business or a key employee or to a child. That's how most commonly, this segment of businesses transact. And so when we start talking about it, most cases, the business owner already has an idea of who they'd like to sell their business to, whether it be their kid or their general manager, or a competitor. In the event of our one client, this is where we brought in a mergers and acquisition advisor to help create that market of creating. The first step is after creating the list is to create a teaser listing that can help to attract buyers. So in the sense of comparing this to real estate is basically let's show a picture of your house without giving the address away, so that people can see whether or not they would want to live there. But you're also not getting buyers coming by your house for open houses. Once a list of buyers are created, we have them sign an NDA, and that's when the slide deck and the in-depth due diligence for the business is done. Typically, buyers will ask for 60 to 90 days to do their due diligence. And then from there, we kind of move forward with the exit planning engagement. Now, from the exit planning side, before we even find a buyer, a lot of this work is already done, because if there is a gap in the value of the business between what it is worth and what you need it to be worth, we need to do work along the way. And that is best served prior to adding in a third party buyer that wants to acquire today. It tends to have better results for the business owner. But that's kind of how we strategically find a buyer. Most buyers will have already a list. If they don't, we bring in a mergers and acquisitions advisor for them.
Gotcha. So most business owners, you're doing a lot of legwork on the front end before you even, so to speak, put the for sale sign up. And then you're doing the initial, hey, here's the generic listing before you bring in people for the detailed slide presentation where they have to sign the NDA, et cetera. Is that right?
That's exactly right. You want to do as much legwork in advance as possible. Most of the business owners we work with are 3 to 5 years out, because it gives you a lot of time to find areas of weakness and improve them. And with creating a market for your business, it's not in the seller's best interest to put up a for sale sign right off the bat. You first want to create a market of buyers that have intentionality in actually buying your business. And then frankly, you get to pit those buyers against one another, and that drives up the transaction value.
Gotcha. I want to pivot next to the tax discussion, because I know a lot of business owners that I've heard from, they're like, oh, one of the excuses or reasons that they give for not wanting to ever exit is, man, the tax bill that I would get hit with if I were to ever to sell this thing just makes it not worth it. What has your experience been like? What are the key considerations people need to understand when it comes to taxes and selling their business?
Yeah, very similar objective when it comes to real estate, never wanting to sell because of the tax hit. Now, I'm not a CPA, but that question does open up a whole can of worms that a qualified CPA should be able to advise you on. But where we go from an education standpoint is really just breaking down the two most common types of transactions that businesses go through, and because they have significantly different tax implications. So the first common sales structure for most Main Street business owners is the asset sale. So that can really be specifically assets within the balance sheet that are being sold to the buyer. The reason why the buyer likes that is because they get to buy all of these assets and be able to depreciate them immediately to be able to offset future business income. The problem, at least on the seller side, is that an asset sale does not have as favorable as a tax treatment. There are certain assets that are on your balance sheet, like accounts receivable and inventory, that are going to be considered ordinary income. So it's going to spike your ordinary income rates for that tax year. Depreciation recapture on fixed assets that you've been depreciating over the life cycle, that's going to be a big one, and that's a rude awakening if you're not prepared for it. But for most sellers, it really the tax treatment for an asset sale really depends on how you allocate the price of the business. So you can allocate, to all of your different fixed assets, your accounts receivable, all that. But if you can push the allocation towards goodwill, which is your company's reputation within the marketplace, that goodwill is considered a long-term capital gain. So with much more favorable tax rates, 20% cap, you might get that 3.8% net investment income tax on them now. So let's call it 24% on the federal side, and then whatever your state's going to charge. Either way, it's a better tax treatment than recognizing it as ordinary income. And so how you allocate the price of the business under an asset sale is really, really important. But the other type of sale that has a different tax implication is a stock sale. So this is primarily for corporations, S corporations, and C corporations that have stock as part of their operating agreement. I'll be honest, most businesses do not transact as a stock sale, at least on the lower middle market, because of um, the liabilities that are occurred with a stock sale. If there has been litigation in the past with the seller, that legal history transfers with the stock to the buyer. So buyers do not like stock sales. They also don't get to depreciate as many assets right off the bat. So sellers really like stock sales. Buyers really like asset sales. They're pitting against one another in that regard. But a really fun tax planning conversation to have for those that own C corporations is the qualified small business stock exclusion. If you have a qualified C corp, you can get the greater of, I believe it's 15 million or 10 times your cost basis in the company back out, completely tax free. And so that's a really popular one that people read up of. I want to go QSBS and get this huge exclusion and tax free. And most sellers don't go that route because the buyer's not going to go a stock sale. So it's a moot point for most business owners. Um, but the benefit of a stock sale is that the entire transaction gets taxed as a long-term capital gain, minus some hot assets that you have on your balance sheet. From a tax perspective, it's much more beneficial for the seller. But knowing the reality that many businesses transact as an asset sale, you have to then incorporate other tax planning opportunities to help mitigate either the year of that sale, if it's an upfront purchase, or if it's an installment sale for 5 years, you have to do it for 5 years. A big one is charitable offsets, either through a donor advised fund or grants or SGOs, which is scholarship grant organizations. The state of Virginia has a really good program. I know locally there's a few SGOs that are qualified that if a business owner is selling their business, that can significantly help on the state tax portion of their bill. So there's a lot of opportunities, but again, what I mentioned earlier, how the business owner operates their business throughout the course of the life cycle is going to impact the tax planning. If they are heavy assets and they depreciate heavily, they're going to have a huge, depreciation recapture upon sale. And so what do we do with that? So there's like I said earlier, it's a real can of worms, and you can go down a whole lot of different paths with that. But that's really where we differentiate ourselves, is that we really go deep into the weeds of the tax education aspect for our clients so that they know exactly what their end net number will be for retirement.
And that highlights just how complicated and important this process is from start to finish. We've emphasized several times the preparation and what you do on the front end impacts the back end, and how many areas this crosses over: financial and retirement planning, taxation, legal implications as well, both liability and contracts, etc. Obviously, there needs to be a team of people to help a business owner walk
Yep.
through this transition. In general terms, who needs to be on that team? What seats should be filled, and for what purpose?
Yeah, so I think there are three essential people that need to be on the team. The CPA, that's non-negotiable. Now, I do want to caveat this, is that one of the obstacles I see many business owners having is that they bring the wrong professionals to the table. People that are maybe perfectly qualified for the role that they've been playing within that professional's life, but this is a different type of engagement. And so, m- um, many professionals might be very, very good at what they do in the role and the scope of what, but you need to make sure that the professional that you're working with knows what they're doing in relation to selling a business. And so having a good CPA that understands business sales and how to allocate sale price is very important. Um, an exit planner, someone that can go in and do that engagement, be able to determine what specific risks are within the business, as well as the personal side that you need to plan for. As well as I think everyone should have financial planner or advisor. Now, sometimes, like for myself, I'm a CFP and a certified exit planning advisor, so I can wear two hats at the same time. Um, but those are the core members of the team. If you start adding more and more members to the team, like the attorney and all of that, the client's going to get a lot of billable hours that they're not going to be super happy about. So you need to be mindful of how many people you're bringing in. But that mergers and acquisitions advisor, the attorney, certainly need to be part of that satellite group that are being brought to the table once their turn at bat is up. Like there are certain times when the attorney needs to be brought in, when the mergers and acquisitions advisor needs to be brought in, but they don't need to be a part of that core group for the business owner.
So the audience of this show is typically, married couples age 30 to 50. They're most likely in the preparation stage, even if the selling or exit point is 10, 15, 20 years off. Would you say then that your suggestion would be to have those initial like core three people in place, the planner, the exit planner, financial planner, and the CPA for now, and then as you get closer, start to involve more of those satellite pieces, or how do you look at it?
Yeah, that's right. Now, the financial planner or the exit planner should be able to determine whether or not an attorney needs to be brought in now or later. There are certain things that need to be drafted, like a buy-sell agreement or articles of incorporation or whatever it may be that need to be drafted. Those can be current things, but it's really if you are a business owner listening to this, you want to think about exit planning not as some far off destination or event, but it's a part of an active business strategy. If you can build your business in a way where it can transact much more quickly than those other businesses in the marketplace, you're at an advantage because you're operating your business differently. You're making decisions differently. And so when you're interviewing a professional, whether that be the CPA or financial advisor or exit planner, you want to know if they know their stuff on the business side because that's going to help mitigate your risk when you inevitably do exit your business.
That makes total sense. So as we're wrapping up here, for people who are starting to think about this, at least in planning for the future, obviously filling those roles is key. Are there any other resources that you would share that you found helpful in educating business owners on how to think about this process?
Yeah, the one resource that I recommend to everyone that's starting this conversation is the Exit Planning Institute. They come out with an annual survey called State of Owner Readiness that is super in depth. They interview thousands of business owners to be able to create their data set. It's very insightful. Um, but one of the final thoughts that I wanted to share specifically is that I want to encourage business owners that are listening to this to not do it alone. Ownership can be super isolating. I have a friend of mine uh, wakes up at 4:30 every morning, gets to work at 5, works till 6, goes home, hangs out with the family. There's no time for him to have a social life, and that's very common with many business owners where it can kind of feel like you're in a silo. So it's really important, and where I would encourage everyone is to surround yourself with a community of like-minded people that can encourage you, support you, um, answer questions that you might have. Part of one of my passion projects is that I created a local business owners group that meets here in Rockingham County. So if you're interested in maybe being part of a larger community, reach out to me and apply for that. I think it might be a good opportunity for someone who is looking to have community with other business owners without that fear of competition or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because it can be lonely at the top of these businesses, and I hear that commonly. So, surrounding yourself with not just advisors, but peers and supporters, encouragers, et cetera, who know the challenge can be really helpful. And speaking of, surrounding yourself with helpful resources, if business owners have heard this episode and are really interested in having some of these initial conversations with you, Kyle, what are the best ways for them to make contact, get started, etc.?
Yeah, I'm super easy to find. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn. I started a YouTube channel for Main Street business owners who want to sell their business as part of their retirement plan that goes really in depth within a lot of the conversations that we've had in this podcast. So if you're have any specific questions, YouTube's a great resource. Give our office a call, schedule a time, and we can, grab a cup of coffee maybe and uh, discuss your situation if you're interested.
Awesome. We'll get links for the readiness survey and your YouTube channel, etc., in the show notes, and people can find that easily. But just want to say thanks, Kyle. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your expertise with the audience, and taking the time to talk to us about selling your business.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Matthew.